Bonjour à toutes, bonjour à tous. Bien, c'est un peu difficile de reprendre la parole dans une langue. Non, Ah, et là on a un problème.
Mes cheveux africains. This.
You manage.
Yes.
Je crois qu'il y a la possibilité pour vous d'écouter les propos de Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie en français si vous le souhaitez. Je vais poser les questions en français, elle va me répondre en anglais. Mais après toutes ces langues qu'on a entendues, ça ne devrait pas vous poser trop de problèmes. Je suis ravi d'être là avec vous, Chimamanda Adichie, pour parler de beaucoup de choses. J'espère d'un certain nombre de questions dont on a entendu parler pendant cette lecture, mais aussi de littérature. Et je voudrais qu'on commence par parler de langue, en fait, puisqu'on vient d'avoir eu l'occasion assez rare, je trouve, d'entendre tellement de langues différentes que pour la plupart, nous ne comprenons pas, ni vous ni moi, et d'avoir fait cette expérience assez étonnante. Je me suis demandé, du coup, quel rapport vous entreteniez à cette langue dans laquelle vous avez lu votre texte, qui n'est pas la langue dans laquelle vous l'avez écrit, puisque vous l'avez écrit en anglais, et qu'il a dû être traduit spécialement pour aujourd'hui. C'est néanmoins une langue qui, j'imagine, structure votre vision du monde, au moins en partie, avec l'anglais à côté. Comment se fait le partage dans cette vision du monde entre l'Igbo et l'anglais pour vous?
First of all, I just want to say how deeply moved I was by that performance. I'm so grateful for it. I found it beautiful and moving, and it just reminded me of the universality of our concerns, and it means very much to me, just listening to this wonderful variety of women in different languages, and just having the sense that something spoke to them in that walk means so much to me. So thank you, you wonderful women who did the reading. Thank you. It's interesting you ask about the sort of how the languages divide my worldview, but I do want to say that English is not to the side. English is very much at the center. I consider myself bilingual, equally so. And so English and Igbo have the same, in different ways, but really have equal emotional power for me. I grew up speaking both languages, and I consider both my first languages. I sometimes would speak both in the same sentence. Actually, I still do. And growing up, Igbo was the language of laughter, the language of emotion, the language of family. English, because I was educated entirely in English in Nigeria, and because Igbo was not allowed in school. It was actually, you got punished for doing something called speaking the vernacular. And so I think growing up, there was a sense of, it's not so much that I had that sense of shame, because I didn't. I've always been proud of my language, but I think that the formal structures of education in Nigeria don't do very much to teach us pride in our languages. But I grew up in a family that was very, very proudly Igbo. It was very important to my father and my parents that we not just speak Igbo, but that the Igbo norms and the Igbo worldview be part of us. So things like, there are obviously things I criticize in the book, such as the idea of male superiority, which of course is not limited to Igbo land. But there are wonderful things about Igbo culture. There's the sense of sort of a can-do spirit. There's a kind of, and I think I grew up with that, and even the language reflects that. There's the sense that each person has a personal guiding spirit. So the chi in many Igbo words, which often is translated as God in the Christian sense, really isn't. It's more like a personal guiding spirit. And in Igbo cosmology, if your personal guiding spirit, you can bend the will of your personal guiding spirit. And I kind of love that idea that you can change the world, you can do it. And so in terms of my writing, I don't know, I don't really like, increasingly, I don't like talking about how my writing comes about. Because I want to do the writing. I don't want to psychoanalyze my own work. So, I don't know, I'm sure Igbo, I don't know. What I do try to do in writing fiction is to create the world I know, which is a world in which people speak English and Igbo all the time, at the same time, in the same sentence. Sometimes people translate directly from Igbo into English, and I try in writing about characters like that to capture that, which is why I throw in Igbo words in my English. And I know that this sometimes confuses or annoys editors, but it's important for me to do that because I want to capture the texture of the world I come from.
Et j'imagine que, du fait de ce que vous venez de dire à propos de l'interdiction de parler Igbo à l'école, le Igbo est davantage une langue de l'oralité pour vous, alors que l'anglais est à la fois dans l'oralité et dans l'écrit, les deux. Par ailleurs, vous m'aviez dit il y a quelque temps que l'Igbo n'est pas une langue parlée par beaucoup de monde, en fait. C'est pas l'une des langues les plus importantes ou les plus littéraires du pays qui compte beaucoup de langues, qui est le Nigeria. Donc, est-ce que... Ma question, c'est quel rapport à l'Igbo écrit? Est-ce qu'il y avait des écoles, par exemple, là où vous étiez, qui enseignaient aussi en Igbo, ou est-ce que c'était un choix d'aller à l'école qui enseignait que en anglais pour votre famille?
So Igbo there is an Igbo literature, but it's not a wide literature, and it's really not a literature that's thriving in the way that Hausa literature is thriving in Nigeria, and Yoruba literature a little bit more than Igbo literature. But growing up, I grew up in Igbo land, so I think had I grown up in a place like Lagos, which is sort of Nigeria's metropolitan center, maybe I would not be as grounded in Igbo-ness as I am. But I grew up on a university campus in Igbo land, and everybody around me spoke Igbo. Everybody else spoke English, but also they spoke Igbo. And so it wasn't so much, and the idea that in school you will get punished for speaking Igbo, but at the same time there was a class in Igbo, so only in Igbo class were you allowed to speak Igbo. And so I took Igbo as a subject, which, by the way, was not cool. And this is one of the things I want to try and change. Because it's important for young people to consider something cool and then to embrace it, right? And our education system is structured in a way that just doesn't give any cool factor to our own languages, at least to Igbo, I think. But I took Igbo in school all the way until the end of secondary school, and it was a choice I made. Because I've always been interested in languages, but I still don't write it as well as I would like. I write it much better than most Igbo people, but it's not a language in which I can make a philosophical argument because I wasn't educated in that language.
Ou un roman ou de la fiction.
I have actually been thinking about it. I don't like talking about things that I'm working on, so I was just about to. But no. So I'm going to be very cryptic and coy and say that the exploration of Igbo in fiction is interesting to me.
Comme je ne connais pas du tout le Igbo, je me demandais à propos des genres, parce que les langues, je ne parle pas beaucoup de langues personnellement, mais je sais que les langues ont toutes un rapport différents au genre. La grammaire ménage des places différentes pour le masculin, le féminin. Parfois, il y a un genre neutre qui a une importance plus grande que dans une autre langue. Qu'en est-il pour le Igbo? Est-ce que c'est très différent de l'anglais, par exemple, et dans quelle mesure ça a une incidence sur la manière de voir le monde genré?
I think that's such an interesting question because I've often blamed the French language for many, many, many terrible things because it is so gendered. I've never understood why, inanimate things. When I took French in school, I don't speak well, obviously, but I read better than I speak. And I remember just being struck by how everything, there was a feminine and masculine for bottles, for chairs. I'm like, what the hell, right? But Igbo isn't. Igbo has the same pronoun for men and women, which means that it's not a language that's gendered in that way. And I think it shapes the way you look at the world. So in reading pre-colonial Igbo history, which interests me very much because I'm deeply interested in the way the Igbo world was structured before Christianity, because now everything has been colored by Christianity. And in reading about pre-colonial Igbo history, I'm struck by how the understanding of gender, as it is in the West today, was very different from the Igbo world. Was not like that. I mean, obviously, men as a group still had power, all of that, but it was more. It wasn't quite as stark. It wasn't quite as divided, and I think the language reflects that. So if I were talking about a man or a woman, I would use the same pronoun o jalafia. A person went to the market, and then you probably, if you wanted to know what the gender was, then you would have to ask man or woman. And actually, that language thing was eye-opening for me fairly recently. So obviously, I go around the world telling people they should respect women, right? And that men and women are equal. And so I was talking to a dear friend of mine who had been to see a doctor. And she said in Igbo that she'd seen the doctor and the doctor was very good. And I then said to her, I switched to English because, again, like I said, in my relationships with family and friends, we switch. So I switched to English and I said, so what did he say? And my friend laughed and said, the doctor was a woman. And I felt so ashamed. Because I realized that even that idea of maleness as default is something I haven't entirely unlearned, clearly. But it also made me think about language, because had we been speaking only Igbo, I wouldn't have voiced that assumption.
Alors, après Igbo, parlons de l'anglais, parce que l'anglais, c'est un continent en soi. L'anglais est parlé dans de très nombreux pays du monde. Il est écrit dans de très nombreux pays du monde. Du coup, la langue n'est pas tout à fait la même. Il y a des accents aussi très, très, très différents. Et je lisais, avant de venir, un article que l'un de vos amis, je crois, écrivain américain, a publié sur vous un portrait dans le New York Times Magazine, qui est Dave Eggers. Et Dave Eggers remarquait que vous parliez un anglais britannique, ce qui, à ses oreilles d'américain, sonnait très clairement comme un anglais britannique, différent de l'anglais. Comment ça s'est passé quand vous êtes arrivé aux États-Unis par rapport à la langue anglaise? Est-ce que vous avez pris conscience pour la première fois que l'anglais que vous parliez était un anglais britannique et pas un anglais américain? Et quelle relation vous avez encore aujourd'hui avec cette différence-là?
Yes, I realized it was different. It's very easy to realize it's different when Americans seem incapable of pronouncing the letter T. And so it didn't take very long for me to feel very disoriented by people saying, water, 20. And I'm thinking, no, it's 20. But but I should say that when I first went to the US, I was young, I was impressionable, I wanted to fit in, and so I started to do an American accent, which I learned from watching American television. And I actually did it very well for maybe 2 years. And then I stopped because it was exhausting. It was exhausting to constantly have to speak outside of what was my natural register. It takes so much more effort for me to say water than it is to say water. And I remember thinking I'm going to save that energy and use it for something more worthwhile, like writing. But growing up, so I grew up on a university campus where obviously speaking well was important. And I had a teacher, and I kind of fictionalized this a bit in my novel Americanah. I had a teacher, Mr. Abo, and I was in the debate society, and we would have these debate meetings, and Mr. Abo would bring a radio in, turn on the BBC, turn to the BBC News, and tell us to listen and make sure we sounded like that. And so in the way that I think all humans have a public voice and a private voice, my public voice is that Mr. Abo voice. So every time I'm in a public space, I remember those meetings with Mr. Abo in secondary school, and I speak that way.
L'anglais de la reine.
Yes, but it's a Nigerian queen. So, because I think when I'm in England, English people know it's not that. But also it's a Nigerian queen's English. But I do have to say that in my private self, I guess it depends. I speak different Englishes. So when I'm talking to people, if I go to get my hair braided in Nigeria, this is the way I'll be talking to the woman so that she'll understand what I'm saying. If I'm talking to family and friends, there's a kind of more sort of, is that what the man said? Imagine the man. No, it's not for us to slap him. Right? So, but of course, my public English is Mr. Abo. I have to sort of remember Mr. Abo in debate society. But I think because English is mine, I do feel that I own English. And it's both a practical position because I grew up in this world that spoke English. I read books only in English. But it's also a political position because there's a part of me that feels deeply resentful of the fact that people invade your continent, colonize it, create countries, impose all kinds of things, practice a dictatorship, because that's what colonialism was. And then years later, they turn around in surprise and tell you, oh, you speak English, why don't you speak your language? Right? So to me, it's mine, and I really do think that Africans have taken ownership. Anglophone Africans have taken ownership of English. Francophone Africans have taken ownership of French. We've done things with it, but it's ours. It's ours.
C'est peut-être une impression trompeuse, mais on a le sentiment, quand on évolue dans le monde littéraire français, que c'est moins facile pour les auteurs francophones d'Afrique, par exemple, que ça l'est pour les auteurs anglophones d'Afrique. Que la langue anglaise est plus accueillante, plus souple, elle se laisse plus facilement transformer, réinventer, que la langue française, qui est toujours gardée de façon très jalouse et militaire par des académies, par des gens qui vérifient qu'on respecte bien les règles. Enfin, c'est l'impression que j'ai. Je ne sais pas comment vous voyez les choses.
I've always found it very interesting that it's Académie Française, right? So do people sit around the table and say, we will not allow that word in? There is something both amusing, but also almost admirable about it, because you have to deeply love a language to want to protect it from what is the normal course that languages take. I think you're right, though. I think it's easier for Africans who are writing in English. But I think that's a consequence of the power that English has in the world. I think that if we went back 100 years, maybe 150, French had that position, where French had global power. So Russians spoke French because they wanted to, that was what you spoke to show that you were civilized. Strangely. But I did promise to behave myself today, so I'll try. So, you know, I suppose my point is I'm not sure how convinced I am that it's because of the suppleness of English. I think that if France suddenly ascended to the global position of power that it occupied 150 years ago, which I don't think is going to happen, but this is all just hypothetical, my sense is that people who wrote in French would find it easier to publish. Being an English speaker, I'm often aware of the privilege of it, you know, the way that it's such a global thing, the way that there's so much translation that happens when you write in English and less so when you write in other languages like French. And, you know, I'm kind of a happy beneficiary, but also I find it a little bit troubling that English has that kind of power. I mean, I remember going to Tokyo and at the train station there were signs in English, and then the one train station when there were no signs in English, I remember feeling a little offended. I thought, wait, there's no, and then I said to myself, you idiot, of course, I mean, why should there be English? It's Japan, it's not English speaking. But it made me realize how, to be an English speaker is to take for granted that English is somehow the language of the world, and it isn't.
Vous avez parlé de vos anglais en mettant un pluriel aux langues anglaises que vous parlez. Et je voulais savoir dans quelle mesure vous jouiez comme écrivain, comme écrivaine, avec ces différents anglais dans votre travail, avec différentes voix. Il se trouve qu'hier, j'avais une conversation publique en hommage à un grand traducteur de l'anglais qui s'appelait Bernard Hopfner, qui est mort il y a quelques mois, et qui avait retraduit une bonne partie de l'œuvre récemment de Mark Twain en français. Et on a pu entendre hier soir un extrait de Huckleberry Finn, dans lequel Twain jouait avec différentes oralités, différents accents très précis le long du Mississippi. Et je voulais savoir, parce que certains écrivains aiment travailler ces différences d'oralité, cette musique, ces différentes musiques. Est-ce que c'est votre cas aussi?
I think so. I like language. I'm a writer who's interested in language, and I also occupy a world that is multifaceted in terms of language. Now, I think Twain is an extreme example. I'm actually fascinated about the translator must have a very difficult time translating Twain, but and I sometimes. I mean, writing in a way to mimic sound, I think is interesting up to a point, and then it becomes tedious. And so the writers, the example American writers who make the choice to write, particularly black characters, to write their language in a certain kind of, more like the sound, you know, sometimes it worries me because I think now we're being selective about how people sound, because even an Anglo-American, waspy American also has an accent, you know. But in my own work, what I try to do is, so I will often have bits of Igbo in there. I will have bits of Pidgin English, because that's really what I think is closest to a lingua franca that Nigeria has. But I also, I mean, it's always a balancing act. I mean, back again to talking about my own work. And the thing about questions like this is I'm really just inventing an answer for you, because when I'm writing fiction, it's not an entirely conscious thing. I mean, obviously some things are conscious, but there's something magical about fiction writing and about inhabiting a world of characters and trying to make it come alive, that only until you're done can you look back and think about, oh, what choices did I make and why? So I really don't know is the most honest answer to your question.
Une autre manière de répondre à la question, ce pourrait être de se souvenir, si je ne me trompe pas, que les premières choses que vous avez publiées, ce n'étaient pas des histoires, ce n'était pas de la fiction, c'était de la poésie.
Oh Lord. I'm going to admit to it, but as long as nobody goes to look for that book. Terrible, terrible poems. But you're right, though. I started... Yes, I did write what I thought were poems when I was younger. And I guess it goes back... And when I'm writing fiction, the thing that I think is consistent in my writing process is that I read poetry. I read much more poetry when I'm writing fiction than I read fiction. Partly because I find... And I read poetry in some ways in the same way that I listen to music, which I don't do very often, music. But poetry, I want the language to wash over me. I don't need to try and decipher what the poem is about. I just want to hear the language. And I do that a lot when I write fiction. And I like to think that it feeds my own language. And in editing, I read aloud. I read my work aloud to myself. I like to hear it. And but again, I'm not even sure what I'm looking for. It's almost intuitive. In reading it to myself, I can tell when it's not right. But I couldn't tell you why. But I just know it's not right.
Quel type de poésie lisez-vous? Est-ce que vous avez des auteurs de prédilection, des moments, des périodes?
I read a lot of contemporary poetry. I don't... Most poetry that... my general rule is if it has the word "o", it's not my thing. Do you know what I mean? So the sort of old-fashioned poetry that will go, "Oh, thou..." I read a lot of contemporary poetry, but also sort of, I'll go from... I like Elizabeth Bishop. The contemporary... Actually, I'm reading right now a book by an African-American poet called Terence Hayes. He's just sublime. I deeply love Derek Walcott's poetry because also I love that he does a lot of language. As a reader, I'm not drawn to poems that are sparse because I like a lot of words on the page. Right? So I'm very drawn to that. But I'll pretty much read any kind of poem. But the ones that I will go back to over and over, Derek Walcott. I like Terence Hayes. See, every time I'm asked, I forget. Can I tell you the ones I don't like? No, I'm kidding. I do like Auden. T.S. Eliot, not so much. I find his work to be cold. See, I'm blank. And then I'm going to go off the stage and remember all the poets I could have talked about.
Et vous partagez avec les Anglais l'idée que la poésie serait un genre littéraire supérieur, parce que j'ai toujours été frappé par le fait que des écrivains anglais que je rencontrais me disaient j'aurais aimé être poète, mais je ne peux pas. Martin Amis, par exemple, ou des gens comme ça, pour qui la poésie est inatteignable, c'est un genre... En France, ce n'est plus comme ça. Les poètes sont au contraire... minorés, ce sont les romanciers qui sont célébrés.
That's interesting. May I suggest why that is? Is it because the French just like to talk too much? So, because there's a lot of philosophy, and because poetry requires a certain discipline, I think. But it's interesting that you say that. I hadn't thought about that idea that it's not even so much that I think poetry is superior. It's that, just technically speaking, I think poetry is, I think you can learn as a writer, any kind of writer. I think you can learn from poetry in a way that I don't think you can say that for any other genre. I think a non-fiction writer can learn discipline, language, form from poetry. A fiction writer can do that. A dramatist can do that. And So I don't really wish I were a poet. I wish I wrote good poems. But I'm happy being a fiction writer, so I don't necessarily think that poetry is superior, but I think poetry is a very good form. I mean, I find it to be a format that I admire. But also I think it's very easy to not do poetry well. This is the other thing.
Alors nous avons glissé progressivement de la question du genre sexué au genre littéraire.
Wait, what?
On n'a pas compris. Et justement, j'aimerais que vous nous expliquiez la relation que vous avez à ces différents genres. Par la poésie, on la laisse de côté, vous avez abandonné assez vite. Mais vous avez abandonné pour écrire de la fiction, pour écrire des nouvelles d'abord, et puis ensuite des romans, même si le recueil de nouvelles a paru après les premiers romans, mais il y a eu quand même des nouvelles publiées. Je voulais savoir quel rapport vous entretenez à ces deux registres maintenant d'écriture que vous avez pratiqués, c'est-à-dire d'un côté la fiction, et de l'autre, mais c'est plus récent, la non-fiction, et notamment ces textes d'intervention, ces textes courts, dont on a eu aujourd'hui évidemment une très belle lecture de l'un d'entre eux.
Maybe so. Do you mean short stories, not short?
Non, on peut commencer par parler des nouvelles, si vous voulez. Effectivement, le format de la nouvelle par rapport au format du roman. Vous avez commencé par cette distance, en quelque sorte. Là encore, si on compare avec la situation littéraire française, c'est pas un genre qu'on pratique beaucoup. Dans le monde anglo-saxon, la plupart des écrivains commencent par écrire des nouvelles. Parce que peut-être c'est moins intimidant que de se lancer dans un roman. Quelle a été votre expérience?
I'm really still confused. So short, I don't think I write short novels. I think Americanah is...
No, short stories.
Short stories, all right. So because
There is translation
okay,
problem.
okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Short story.
Yeah, short stories they've been very important to me. I started to write short stories when I went to the US, actually. So before the US, in Nigeria, I had published a play, I had published poetry, I had written what I called novels. But when I came to the US, I realized that the short story was a form that was supposed to get you into the, I guess, publishing world. That most publishers wanted to see that you had written a short story if you were looking to sell a novel. There's a revolution happening at the back. Oh, I think they want to talk about the book. Oh,
on a le temps.
Okay, essays. Oh, right. Okay. So, it's the person. The person who writes fiction is very different from the person who writes non-fiction. When I'm writing fiction, I occupy an entirely different emotional place. I am transported. I'm very happy when it's going well. I feel that my ancestors are speaking to me, honestly. But when I'm writing non-fiction, I'm a lot more grounded. I know what I'm doing. I know that I want to communicate something. In particular, I'm very careful about being lucid. And so when I was writing D.A. Jawele, for example, it was very different from writing my novels because I wanted to send a message about D.A. Jawele. It came from passion. It came from feeling very strongly about it. But it was also quite clear-eyed. I wasn't transported or particularly happy, quite frankly, when I was writing it. And so I find it really different things, non-fiction and fiction, really different, just even in the conception.
Et même différent du point de vue de la manière dont ces textes sont nés, au fond. Puisque si on prend votre premier texte, Manifeste féministe, il est né d'une commande, d'une demande, qui était cette conférence TED, donc ce format court de prise de parole orale, que vous avez décidé par la suite de publier sous forme d'un texte réécrit, repris, mais l'origine était une commande et une intervention orale. Pour celui dont on a eu la lecture aujourd'hui, c'était pas le même type de commande, mais c'était quand même une commande de votre ami, au fond, qui vous a envoyé une lettre et vous a incité à lui répondre, dans un registre qui, au départ, était un registre privé, qui n'était pas nécessairement une intervention publique. Vous avez décidé ensuite de changer un peu le texte et d'en faire une intervention. Donc là aussi, il y a dans l'origine même des textes une vraie différence.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Fiction comes from, I don't know, a story calls me. So, but my non-fiction, in particular my writing about gender, it just comes from feeling very strongly about things. And often it's quite specific. So the first one, we should all be feminists. I had been asked to give this TED Talk. I didn't know what else to talk about because I had already given another TED Talk years before. And this TED Talk was being organized by my friend. And he said to me, "We need you to come." And I said, "I have nothing to talk about." And he said, "Well, okay, but there is the one thing you're always lecturing us about." And until then, I honestly did not know that among my friends, I was known as the person who would lecture them about women's rights. And so I said, "Wait, what do I lecture you about?" And he said, "Women." So then I said, "Okay, I'll talk about it." And it was a kind of, I remember thinking nobody will care because it was a huge hall full of Africans. And I was talking about feminism. It just doesn't really go well together. Quite frankly, I think feminism is still a word that we're trying, I think. We're trying to take it back. We're trying to own it. But it's still a word that brings about a lot of hostility everywhere in the world. And to make the choice to be publicly feminist, I knew had consequences. But I gave the talk anyway because I felt strongly about it. And later, when it kind of took off, I was surprised. I mean, I was happy, but I was surprised. And it was things like a friend of mine telling me in Lagos that her friends, that a bunch of men in her office were watching it at work and talking about it. And I thought, really? And that made me happy, particularly because she said there was a divide between the men. So some of the men were like, "Yes, she's right, we're feminists." And the other men were like, "This is nonsense." But at least a conversation was happening. And with this one, Dear Jawole, I wrote it years before for a friend of mine, a shorter version of it. And then I had read some pieces online about Nigerians having an argument about how a woman has to cook. And I just was so sad because I thought, come on. I mean, it felt so retrograde. And so I decided to make it longer and to put it out on Facebook because that came from, I was just really annoyed. I just thought we need to, in some ways I wanted to map out my own feminism, what it is to me, how I define it. But I hope that I would also help, particularly young women, map out their own feminism so that it would be more difficult for a man to say to them, "Oh, since you say you're a feminist, therefore you're un-African," which is a kind of nonsense I get sometimes. And so I wanted it to be like a practical thing. I'm not interested in feminist theory. I'm not interested in gender theory. I'm interested in the practical, pragmatic, useful, and maybe incremental ways that we can start to make changes. And I think often it can take simply giving a woman the emotional strength to believe that she can, because she can, but the world has told you can't endlessly. And so that's really what it was for me. I wanted it to be like a practical thing. and I hadn't quite thought about publishing it as a book. I wanted it to just be read widely. And then I realized, doing a book would probably not be a bad idea, which I then did.
Du coup, d'une certaine façon, votre statut a changé un peu. Vous êtes passé du statut de romancière ou d'écrivain au statut qu'en français on appelle, même si le mot n'est pas tout à fait le même en anglais, intellectuel. C'est-à-dire que vous n'êtes pas, et vous dites vous-même, une experte du féminisme. Vous venez de dire, je n'ai pas particulièrement travaillé sur la théorie féministe, ça ne m'intéresse pas, mais vous avez un point de vue. C'est exactement ce qu'on appelle la posture de l'intellectuel. Quelqu'un qui, sur la base d'une légitimité, d'une reconnaissance qui vient de son travail, en l'occurrence artistique pour vous, de votre travail de romancière. Vous prenez la parole publiquement pour dire des choses politiquement. C'est pour ça que je pense qu'il n'était pas inutile de faire le détour par la littérature, parce qu'on ne peut pas considérer qu'il y a deux Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, l'une qui écrirait des romans et l'autre qui prendrait le temps d'intervenir publiquement sur les questions du féminisme. C'est la même personne. Il y a là une articulation qu'il faut absolument tenir et saisir.
All right, I think I missed something in the translation. Wait, did you say that there are two Chimamandas or
No.
there are not? Oh, I
No,
see.
I said the opposite.
Okay.
I said you're just one person.
Yeah.
And
I just have different head wraps. So some days I put on my feminism head wrap and then I'm feminist, and other days I do my novelist head wrap and then I'm a novelist. All right, that joke didn't work out too well. But it's not remarkable to me, right? I think that I think people are different things. I do think that it's often women who are expected to be single things. So there's a sense in which women are expected to be one thing or the other thing, rather than one thing and the other thing. And so it doesn't even feel in any way conflicting to me. I've been feminist since I was old enough to observe the world. I was feminist long before I knew what the word feminist was, which is to say that as a child I was very aware and very alert to the nuances of how men and women were treated differently, boys and girls were treated differently. I was very alert to it. And it wasn't for me so much the difference as it was that the difference had meaning. If it were simply different but equal, it would have been fine, but it wasn't. And I was very much aware of that as a child. And I was the child who asked questions. You know, you were in my ancestral hometown, and it was fun for children because the masquerades would come out and all the children would run out to look at them. And then suddenly the really interesting masquerades, the ones that were supposed to have the most evil medicine, the ones that could turn you into a snake, that kind of thing, they would be about to come out, and then some adult would say, all right, all the girls go inside. And I would think, wait, hold on, I want to see the cool masquerade. And they'd be like, you can't because you're a girl. And so things like that stayed with me. But at the same time, I was a child who loved to read. I was a child who loved to write. And I was all of those things. And they don't necessarily seem conflicting to me. And I think there's also a literary tradition of people who... obviously, I don't think all writers have to take positions, right? But there is a tradition of writers who do take political positions and stand up for things and continue to be writers. And in Nigeria, in some ways, it's almost as if for African writers, especially in the 1960s, and sort of when colonialism was still something very present, it was actually almost the exception for writers not to take political positions, you know. And even just looking at the US, and I think Susan Sontag was one of those writers who stood up and took positions and still remained a literary figure in a way. It's a bit strange for me, though, because I didn't quite plan this. This was not quite the plan. I didn't plan to become a feminist voice. And I still feel ambivalent about it sometimes. But I feel very happy to have the opportunity to talk about what I really care about. My fiction is my first love, and that is a thing that cannot change. Right? The thing that I most want to do is to write fiction. So I'm happy to be here. I'm happy that all these lovely people came out. But there's still a part of me that would rather be in my study at home, wearing pajamas and trying to write a good sentence. But then my second love is my passion for feminism. And just wanting to change the world. I think there's just a deep down, there's just a part of me that wants justice, that wants peace. I really do want everyone to be happy, right? And well, and thrive, and all of that. But I think that for us to get there, we have to have difficult conversations, and I'm willing to have those conversations.
je n'opposais pas le fait, évidemment, d'être féministe et écrivain, mais le choix, dont vous dites d'ailleurs que ce n'est pas vraiment un choix, qu'il est arrivé un peu par hasard, de devenir une féministe publique, et donc de passer une partie de votre temps désormais à porter publiquement ces idées, et parfois au détriment du temps passé à écrire des romans, vous le dites vous-même à l'instant. Donc, alors même que certains écrivains sont prudents, ont peur que leur œuvre littéraire soit rabattue sur une dimension politique. Vous n'avez jamais eu peur de ça. Vous avez le courage d'être sur les deux fronts, au fond.
No, I'm not at all. And I would resist it very much if my work, if my fiction were read only politically. But I think that's actually something that many writers who are from Africa, from Asia, from Latin America, that's a risk that they run. That's a risk they have simply by being from these places, that there's a tendency to read our work as anthropology or as politics, rather than really as a story of human beings. I remember my first novel, Purple Hibiscus, when it came out in the US, and there's a father figure who is abusive, and so many people kept saying to me, this father figure really represents Nigeria and Nigerian dictatorship. And I thought, no, he's just a really nasty man. He doesn't represent anything. But I was struck by that because there was a sense in which it was impossible to have a kind of entry into my work unless it was seen in political terms. But at the same time, that fear doesn't stop me from, in fact, taking political positions. Because I have, and I think it's impossible to live in the world as an engaged, present citizen and not have political positions. When people say, oh, I shy away from politics, I just think, but how can you? Because, because there are many things that need to change. And I just feel like, we should all bloody well have political positions.
Votre premier roman, justement, Purple Hibiscus, est un roman qui se passe pendant la guerre du Biafra. Et, peut-être vous pourriez en dire un mot, parce qu'on est dans un festival des droits humains. Et je crois que ça a été un moment historique dans les années 60 qui n'est pas anodin pour la création du mouvement humanitaire, cette guerre. Ça a été l'occasion pour des médecins de s'engager et de créer des organisations. C'est cette histoire-là aussi. Et comment j'aurais aimé que vous nous expliquiez ce qui vous a conduit à faire de ce moment historique très important pour le Iboland dans lequel vous avez grandi, le contexte, le cadre de ce premier roman. Et la place de la question des droits humains dedans. Vous parliez d'un personnage, mais c'est plus vaste que ça.
So it's Half of a Yellow Sun, my second novel. It's Half of a Yellow Sun.
Pardon, pas Purple Hibiscus, le deuxième roman, excusez-moi.
Yeah. So Half of a Yellow Sun, my second novel. It came from wanting to understand my family's history, and then also wanting to understand my country's history. So my family was deeply affected by the war. Both my grandfathers died in that war, and I think it shaped the path my family took, because I often wondered, had my grandparents not died, what would our lives have been like? My grandfather was so important to my father. And so I grew up hearing a lot about my grandfather. And my father is 86 years old, but he still talks about his father every other day. He still refers to his father. And so my grandfather was very present as a memory. And I think there was a part of me that wanted to understand what had taken him from us, this war. And to understand the things that my parents talked about sometimes. My mother would say, I had this before the war. So there was a kind of a break. There was before the war and then there was after the war. And I wanted to try and understand it, so I started reading everything I could find. And I think Biafra then became this international thing where photographers made their mark, their careers by taking pictures, and international aid became a thing, and Doctors Without Borders was founded because of Biafra. But for me, it's never been that. It's been much more personal. It's been that conflict that took my grandfathers, that robbed my father of his innocence, really, my father and his generation of Igbo people. And also the thing that's still very present in Nigeria today, because it's still quite contested. I mean, people still, sometimes even the facts are contested. But I think what's changed is that now there's a bit more of a conversation about that period, which wasn't happening 20 years ago. And I think my novel, Half of a Yellow Sun, contributed to that conversation because people could talk about difficult things if they were talking about it in terms of fiction.
Vous avez eu plusieurs fois l'occasion de dire que l'une des grandes figures de référence littéraire pour vous au Nigeria, ça a été Chinua Achebe. On peut penser aussi que vous avez lu tôt un autre auteur qu'on a connu notamment après son prix Nobel en Europe, qui est Wole Soyinka, enfin, que le grand public a connu parce qu'il était déjà traduit depuis longtemps. Est-ce qu'il y a eu pour vous, est-ce que c'est important, des figures féminines de la littérature nigériane ou plus largement africaines qui vous ont marqué dans vos années adolescentes ou étudiantes?
Yes. Flora Nwapa, who's an Igbo writer who wrote very short novels, but whose work was about Igbo women and their lives, I was drawn to very much. Flora Nwapa didn't have the kind of regard that I think she might have had she not been a woman writing about women at the time that she was writing. Ama Ateidu, who is Ghanaian, a bit later, I discovered her maybe sort of late, so maybe like 16, 17. I just really love her. She's the kind of, she's my kind of feminist. She occupies her space in the world. She does what she wants to do. She writes about women in all of their complexity. She has a sense of humor. And she worked for a while as Minister of Education in Ghana and then left because she just couldn't do it anymore. And just a really remarkable woman. And when I first read her little book called Our Sister Killjoy, even the title, Our Sister Killjoy, I loved it. And she's a very important writer to me today. So I think it was Flora Nwapa, Ama Ateidu, Buchie Mechata, I read earlier, and she's also a Nigerian Igbo writer. And I really liked her novels because they recognized women. I mean, there's something about reading, and I loved Achebe, and I love Soyinka's, particularly Soyinka's memoirs. But in a lot of the writing by African men, and it's not that I expect men to write about women because, that can be a disaster too, but it's that you occupy a fictional world and you can tell which writer recognizes the humanity of women. You can tell which writer for whom women are really just objects. And when you go into a fictional world in which women are real, there's something about it that's very affirming. And so I felt that about Flora Nwapa in particular, because her world was almost entirely female. And also I loved, and in Ama Ateidu, but also I loved that it wasn't, these women didn't write, they didn't romanticize women. The women were human. So women did terrible things and good things. Women, and that I loved. I loved that very much.
Quelle relation, y a-t-il une différence dans la relation que vous entretenez avec vos personnages selon qu'ils sont féminins ou masculins?
I like my girls. No. That's actually an interesting question. When I wrote Half of a Yellow Sun, for example, and for me, the heart of that novel is the houseboy Ugu. And in thinking about it, Ugu is really me. I mean, Ugu is the character who is least like me on the surface. Ugu is male. Ugu grew up without an education. Ugu grew up in a rural village. All of the things that didn't happen to me. But Ugu is me in his in his worldview, in his curiosity about the world, in his wanting to know and wanting to do better. And a lot of those things are me. And when I was thinking about it, I thought, you know, Ugu really is me. And I don't think I felt a deep connection to Ugu, because Ugu was me. But I think that there are when I was writing the white English character, at first I had a very difficult time because I was very much aware that I was writing a white Englishman. And I think I then took on a kind of pastiche of Henry James. I made my sentences very unnecessarily lavish and convoluted. You know, so the whole time I was writing the early stages of Richard, what I was really doing was just copying Henry James. And then at some point I realized it was not coming naturally to me. It was getting very difficult to do because that was not my voice. And what I said to myself was, Richard is white, he's male, he's English, but Richard is me, really. Richard is the part of me that wants community, that feels that love is important, that wants to belong, that for whom a sense of belonging is important. Those things matter to me. Richard didn't have them. And so just putting that in my head, it was easy to write Richard.
Ça, c'est la magie de la fiction, c'est de pouvoir vivre ce type d'expérience d'écriture que la non-fiction ne vous offrirait jamais pour penser ce genre de choses. Se glisser dans la peau d'un personnage.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, which is the magical thing about fiction. But I do have to say that for Richard and also for Ugu, I did a lot of research. I talked to many, many Englishmen, particularly older Englishmen, because I wanted to get a sense of Richard's life. And so details like what would he have eaten, being from, you know, upper middle class English family. What was his school like? So I talked to Englishmen who told me all the stories, and they kind of informed the character, right? But emotionally, Richard was me, but everything else obviously wasn't.
Une dernière question avant de passer la parole au public pour quelques questions, Chimamanda. Dans la lettre qui a été lue tout à l'heure dans toutes ces langues, dans ce texte, vous dites que vous venez à votre tour d'avoir un enfant, une petite fille, et que vous allez vous efforcer de mettre en œuvre tous les conseils que vous donnez à votre ami. Du temps a passé depuis, un peu. Comment vous pensez que vous vous en êtes tiré de tous ces conseils au plan très pratique cette fois?
Very well. Well, no, I have to say she's still too young. So she's 2.5. So I can't quite pat myself on the back yet. But I'm happy to announce that she seems to be her own person. Sometimes that terrifies even me. And she has no interest in dolls, which makes me happy, I have to say. She likes making things, which makes me really happy, because my plan is by the time she's 10, I need her to change my car tires when they go down. So I kind of want her to have practical skills, all the skills that I don't have because I wasn't raised to have them. And I find that very limiting. And but I think we're doing well. And I think that she sees that gender roles, she does not see gender roles practiced in our house. So she doesn't see that being a woman means I do the housework and do the cooking. She sees that either person can. And I think it's kind of good for her. But also, you know, she's my daughter, I adore her. So maybe I can't see anything going wrong because I'm blinded by love.
Oui, alors j'imagine qu'un micro peut circuler pour vos questions. Je vois des mains levées, je ne sais pas où c'est la personne qui... Voilà, attendez. Deux secondes, si vous pouvez repérer les gens qui lèvent la main. Voilà.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. Thank you very much, Mrs. Adichie, for being here. I've loved all your books, but I wanted to ask you a question about Americanah that we have not touched upon until now. In that book, you give us the impression that the character, maybe it's more than an impression, really discovers to be black when she goes to the US. Because when she is in Nigeria, this feeling is not there. She's just like everybody else. We have today, we have today in Europe what everybody calls a migration crisis, and we have many people coming from Africa finding themselves in society where being black is still being different. I would love to hear your opinion on what does it mean today to be a black person in Europe or in another country, especially when you are a migrant. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I was just thinking about language and thinking about, you said societies where being black is different, but it's more than just being different. It's that different has many, many negative stereotypes and connotations attached to it. Because for me, difference is not a problem, right? I think it's wonderful that we live in a world of just glorious difference. The problem is when we start to attach meaning to difference and value to it. I wasn't black when I came. I wasn't black until I came to the US. That's how I think of it. And I think thinking about blackness in Europe, I think there are many black people here who probably will talk about it better than I can, because I've never lived in Europe. In the US, I discovered I was black, and in Nigeria I had thought about myself as Igbo, because it's my ethnic group, as Christian, because in Nigeria religion is a major identifying thing for us. And then I went to the US and I realized that my Igbo-ness was irrelevant, so was my religion. What really was relevant was the color of my skin. And I also realized that it wasn't so much that people saw me and saw black, that black meant something in America. And that realization came in subtle ways often, because the thing about racism is that the manifestation of racism has changed, but the language in which we talk about it and try to understand it hasn't changed. And I think that there are people who think that unless you've been called nigger, then you haven't experienced racism. But nobody really, I mean, it's now really fringe to sort of, call people nigger. I mean, it's really not how racism manifests itself anymore. And I remember being in a class and writing the best essay, and my professor being surprised by that. And it was sort of 2 weeks into class. He brought the essays in, and he said, "Who is," and he called my last name. And when I raised my hand, he looked surprised. And I realized that the only reason he looked surprised was because I was black. He hadn't expected the person who wrote that essay to be black. And it was a moment for me that I will never forget, because I thought, oh, so that's what it means in this country. And remember, I was coming from Nigeria, where black achievement is ordinary, where power is black, right? Where so the idea of achievement was not racial in Nigeria. But in the US, it was. And I would walk into a store and you could tell that people were looking at you in a different way, and you could tell. And it's something I came to learn, because when I first went, I didn't really get it. When people would say certain things and then somebody would say, oh, that's so offensive, I would be puzzled. So I'd be like, I don't really understand why this is offensive. But the longer you stay in a country that is racialized as a black person, the more you start to get it, right? And so I mean, sort of a kind of simple way for me to make the distinction is that if you're a black person living in the US, and I would say also living in Europe, if you walk into a store, and I'm just using this as an example, and somebody is very rude to you, or somebody doesn't attend to you, you're thinking it might be because that person is having a bad day, right? Because we all have bad days, and we all, or that person is an asshole. Some people are. But if you're black, there's a third option, which is that person doesn't like black people, or that person is racist. If you're a white person and that happens to you, you're thinking the person is having a bad day, the person is an asshole. Race is not an option. And I think that's really, in a very sort of simple and subtle way, the difference. It's that race becomes a present thing all the time. And sometimes you're not sure when it is race and when it isn't. But the point is that the possibility of it being race is always there, and it's an exhausting thing to deal with. And so sometimes for me, when I get off the plane in Lagos, it's so refreshing not to have to think race, you know? Of course, I'm thinking other things, right? So in Nigeria, there are other things to be very angry about. But race is not one of them. And living in a racialized place means that I walk into in the US everywhere, I walk in and I immediately know how many black people are in the room. Because you need to know who has your back in case something goes wrong. And it also means that you're just alert to subtleties, right? And it's even more interesting the way that race and class are intertwined. I mean, race and gender, don't even get me started. Race and class is even more interesting because, so I happen to be privileged when it comes to class, but often the assumption in the US is that if you're black, not only are you unintelligent, but you're poor. And I cannot tell you how many times at the airport I'm walking to board a flight because of my privilege. I'm in the fancy class. But I get in the line and they always tell me, no, madam, this way. They don't look at my form. They just assume looking at me, you cannot possibly be in that line. It happens all the time. It happened in Paris the last time I was there. This woman, who by the way was a black woman, because we all absorb racist ideas. So I'm walking to the line and she just says, madam, this way. And I said, but you haven't looked at my thing. I am, in fact, in first class. And she said, oh, sorry. Because in her thinking, black people shouldn't be in those spaces, right? And I think there's something about it that we absorb all of those ideas because we live in a society that's racialized. And I think it affects the way we deal with people, which is why black people have very different experiences when they go to job interviews. It doesn't matter how qualified they are. What the interviewer is seeing is a black face. And there are assumptions that are made. And I mean, how to combat this is what I keep thinking about. And you know, increasingly, I don't think it's to have diversity meetings. I think, you know, I mean, I think they're well-meaning, but I'm not sure how effective they are because the diversity meetings start with a lie. The lie is that somehow we're all the same and we're all kind of colorblind, but that's not true. So I kind of feel that maybe the way to deal with it is to first acknowledge difference, right? To acknowledge, you know, I will need a different foundation shade from you, and that's fine. But then the thing to do is to ask why we attach certain meanings and value to different skin tones, and to question that and to try and undo that. I think it's very difficult. I think what's happening today in Europe is the result of something that happened a long time ago. And I find it interesting that all of these debates in Europe where people say, you know, they're coming to Europe. Of course they're coming, because 100 years ago, you went to their continent, didn't ask for permission, right? But I mean, it seems to me, I really do think that has to be part of the conversation. If we start off talking about migration in a way that makes it seem unbelievable and illogical, it will never work. There's actually an inherent logic, I think, to it. Because you go back, I mean, you look at Africa in particular. You know, I'm Nigerian because the British created Nigeria. The person from the country near mine is Togolese because the French, and the set up structures, and you know, and I keep saying this, that these countries in Africa were not set up to succeed. They were not. You cannot impose a dictatorship, which is what colonialism was. Because, you know, we talk about, the colonial governments, and sometimes it can sound benign. It was not benign. And it seems to me strange to expect that countries that were birthed in dictatorships will suddenly flower to democracies. It's going to take a long time. And in that process, people will want to leave because human beings simply want better lives. And they're going to go to the places from which the other people came 100 years ago. There's an inherent human logic to it. And human history has been a history of movements. In human history, you go back and it's been a history of movements. So what we can talk about is we can talk about how do we regulate this, but I don't think we should start off with the premise that it's somehow a crazy illogical thing, because it isn't.
va prendre une autre question, mais je voudrais juste rajouter un fait, peut-être en hommage aussi d'une certaine façon à votre père, qui était statisticien, je crois. Parce que on parle de la crise des migrants, mais on n'entend pas beaucoup rappeler une chose dans les médias, qui est un fait démographique donné encore récemment par le FMI. L'ouest de l'Afrique est la région du monde qui émigre le moins au monde. Le moins de tous les autres endroits du monde. Contrairement à cette représentation d'une vague, d'une déferlante qu'on verrait. Non, c'est l'endroit du monde duquel le moins de gens partent de chez eux pour aller ailleurs. Et quand ils partent, en général, c'est pour aller ailleurs en Afrique, d'abord. Donc, ce sont des choses qu'il faut garder à l'esprit, parce que ce sont des choses que l'on voit dans les statistiques, mais que l'on entend assez peu à la télévision, et pas seulement à la télévision. Une autre question ?
Hello, everybody.
Thank you. I did not know that.
Hello, Chimamanda. Thank you very much for coming here. It's over here. Sorry,
Okay.
stand up. Thank you very much for coming here and being part of this. I just wanted to find out, question to you, Shay Jawele, what is the meaning or another meaning behind the choice of title?
Oh, there really isn't. Ijawele is an Igbo name that I've always liked. It's also an unusual Igbo name. And even for some Igbo people, it's difficult to pronounce properly. So I just wanted to use a name that would make things difficult for people. That really was the only, yeah. Is that your little girl? Oh.
On va peut-être prendre 2 autres questions. Il faut qu'on arrête dans 5 minutes. Donc, il y a... Le micro arrive.
I have a microphone.
Il y a quelqu'un qui a un micro, pardon, je ne vous avais pas vu. Allez-y.
Oui, merci beaucoup. Donc, tout d'abord, je tiens à remercier Chimamanda pour sa présence, au sens propre à Genève comme au sens figuré dans notre monde. Parce que j'imagine que, comme pour beaucoup de personnes ici, Chimamanda a changé beaucoup de vies, en tout cas la mienne, parce qu'elle a mis notamment des mots sur nos intuitions, qu'elle a traduit nos combats, que ce soit internes ou externes, en un vocabulaire qui s'est révélé accessible et accepté, qui a pu s'exporter. Et on la remercie infiniment pour ça, parce qu'elle a fait de la description de nos situations une évidence, en fait. Et elle a aussi rendu évident le fait qu'une femme noire, jeune et africaine soit reconnue comme une figure majeure, non seulement de la littérature, mais également du milieu intellectuel. Et on la remercie parce qu'en faisant cela, elle a ouvert un champ. C'est pas seulement un parcours individuel qu'on salue, c'est l'ouverture du champ des possibles pour beaucoup de jeunes femmes comme moi qui la regardent et qui se disent oui, ben, c'est possible aussi pour moi. Maintenant, la question que j'ai envie de poser, parce que justement, la présence, la stature de Chimamanda ont l'air d'une évidence, mais on se doute bien quand on connaît le monde dans lequel on vit que ça a été loin d'une évidence, parce que c'est aussi à ça que la lecture, mais également l'écoute des discours de Chimamanda nous invite à faire, c'est de ne pas être naïf. Et donc on se doute bien que là où elle est, pour parvenir là où elle est, ce n'a pas été quelque chose de facile. Donc ça nous aiderait également de savoir à quel défi particulier elle a été confrontée, et surtout, plus important, quelle stratégie elle a adoptée pour les surmonter. We love you. Oui, on l'aime.
Thank you. By the way, I love what you said about what's possible, and it means a lot to me. And I just want you to know it is possible. You know, there's I think there's so much talent and there's so many dreams that sometimes we let ourselves hold back because maybe we haven't seen somebody who looks like us who's done it, or you know, the world is telling us we can't, but we can, we really can. And so when I started writing, I mean, it was I was when I was younger, I was, you know, quite smug, and I thought, oh, of course, I've written the best thing ever in the world. And so I sent out the manuscript for this novel that I wrote before Purple Hibiscus, and it was rejected by everyone. And and I had a very difficult time dealing with rejection initially because I took it very personal. and I would just have these spells of depression. But I came to see that rejection is part of the territory. When you're rejected, it's not so much, it can in fact be that your work is not very good. It can also be that it's just not the right fit, or that the editor doesn't get it. And really, for me, then rejection became, it's been rejected, I'm going to try again. So I would send out, and even when I was trying to get short stories published, I would send out short stories. I would get these form rejection letters where you just knew that an intern had just looked at it and put it in an envelope and sent it off to you. And then gradually I started getting the nicer rejections where the editor actually wrote in the editor's hand. And then I got acceptances, but it was a slow progression. And in some ways I'm happy I went through that, because it teaches you that you have to keep going. You know, and I did believe you also have to have confidence. And in talking to young women, I say this very often, that you have to own your ambition. You know, don't apologize for wanting more and for being ambitious. I've been ambitious since I was 3 years old. You know, no, seriously, I wanted to be the class prefect. I wanted to, and then when the teacher wouldn't let me hold the cane and beat the noisemakers, I was very upset because I wanted to beat the noisemakers. I was the annoying child who, if I got a 95 on a test, I'd be very upset because I was thinking, I want to get 100. And it was for me. I wanted to do it for myself. And as an adult, I've learned to own that. You know, you have moments of self-doubt because every human being has that. But you also have to own it. You have to believe that what you're doing is, you know, worthwhile. Obviously, you have to do it well. But so I think it's learning to understand that rejection is part of the territory. I think that it was a bit difficult for me, but I think I've mostly learned that now. But also, now being this public figure, there are times when I don't want to be a public figure. There are times when it's very easy for people to misunderstand you, sometimes deliberately. You know. It's easy for people to give you motivations that are not yours, and it can be very annoying because there's nothing you can do about it. And this is also why I'm not on social media, because I think I'll get into fights every day. And so that kind of, it comes with the territory. And but you kind of learn to selectively ignore things so that you can keep yourself focused on what you want to do. But I just want to say, not just to you, but to all the women in this room, it's possible we can do more. I think about all the dreams that women have let go of. And I think about how the world would have been had women been allowed to be their full selves. And I kind of dream about when that can happen. So if there's any way that my work or my presence can help women do that, yes. Can we just, you know what, I promise I will not ramble, I'll keep my answers short, but I do want to hear from the people who had their hands up. I'll keep my answers really short.
Alors, peut-être un dernier ensemble de questions comme ça.
J'ai un microphone ici. J'ai déjà le microphone.
Je vous vois.
So my question is, do you consider equality between men and women a fundamental human right? And how to protect and promote this right in front of religions such as Catholicism or Islam that doesn't consider men and women equal? Because we often say we should change our culture, but we should also say we should change our religion.
Yes, but I often think of religion as part of culture. And yes, of course, I think that equality of men and women is absolutely a human right, absolutely. How do we, one of the things I've been thinking about lately actually is how to craft a feminism within the religions. I think there are parts of the world that in which religions are so central and so important that you cannot discard religion, and so you have to work with religion. And so I actually want to go through a study of the Bible, for example, to find justifications for feminism, because I think you can justify anything with the Bible. And you think about, as Christians, you think about Jesus Christ, and you think about the regard that Jesus Christ clearly had for women. And you start to realize that maybe the way that we have structured Christianity maybe wasn't what Jesus had in mind. So I think it's entirely possible, really. I really do. And I also think that, there are very interesting and progressive readings of Islam that I have come across. in which, again, it's not this kind of the mainstream reading of it, which is that women are inferior, all of that. And so, yes, I think it's possible. I think that the women who are experts in religion really need to work on crafting feminist versions of those religions. But also remember that, human beings made religion, so we can always remake religion.
Can I just ask a question? I've got the microphone. Thank you very much. Sorry, I just wanted to get in before the next person did. I'm Igbo and I'm Nigerian, and I just wanted to thank you, really. It's the first time I have heard in a public place like this the Igbo language spoken outside a non-Igbo audience, and it did wonderful things throughout my whole body and soul. And I just wanted to say thank you. And I recorded that bit so I can get my parents to listen to it, because it would also touch their souls. Thanks.
Thank you. There's a young woman who's had her hand up for a while.
Une question devant, là, oui. S'il vous plaît.
Hi.
Hi.
Well, as a single mother of 2 boys, I feel like I have a great responsibility towards my sons to change the perspective they have in my household. But I always had a problem with the word feminism, and I wanted to know if you always had that relationship with the word, because it feels like, to me, it implies like we have to prove something that we are, and I live my life as I don't really give to about what people think about, sorry, my heart is pounding. I'm such a fan.
No, I get, and I understand, I've always been happy with the word feminist, but I also understand people who haven't. I think in particular there are black women who felt that Western feminism excluded them. The history of Western feminism was racist, so there were many black women who didn't feel connected to it. And not even just black women, women who were not white didn't feel connected to it. I just take the dictionary meaning, but I also think it's important to have a word around which we can all rally, because I think unless you name a problem, it's difficult to solve it. And there's a problem. And when you say you feel like we have to prove something, yeah, we do. That there's a problem that we need to solve. And so I sometimes think that women are a bit uncomfortable with it because it can often come across as too aggressive, or men will be put off by it. And my thing is that a man who's going to be put off by that word feminist is probably not the kind of man you want to be with anyway.
Voilà, je me permets de I have the microphone too.
Okay. Me too.
Wait, where?
I'm sent here. I'm on behalf of an organization called the Blash. So it's an organization for black women in Swiss Germany, and I wanted to introduce this association because I'm not a black woman, obviously. I'm a transgender mixed race person. I don't consider myself a male. I consider myself as a non-binary person. But anyways, I'm here on behalf of Blash. So because one person asked a question about migrants, I really wanted to stress the fact that, of course, migrants, it's really important to talk about migrants, but there are thousands and thousands of children born here and who were born here since a long, long time, who were born black and Swiss. And I think that it's really great that Chimamanda is here and that we get to ask her questions, but there are people that are here that can also answer questions. So the first organization is called Blash. The second one I wanted to talk about is Afrolit, that I'm not part of, but who was created by a black Genevan woman, an association that pushes black authors. So it also exists. You can also ask them, And the last one is the Alliance Against Racial Profiling, which was created also in Bern, so you can also contact them. So I wanted to say this, and so sorry for taking this space to talk about this. And I just wanted to ask you your opinion on such organizations, especially on associations like Afro Literature, and what you think of people of color being staying together and pushing forward African and Afro-diasporic literature. Thank you.
I think that's good.
I had a question. As a fellow Nigerian lady myself, I'm really proud to be Nigerian today. Seeing you on that stage and actually speaking Igbo is very heartfelt. I'm Yoruba. But I just wanted to come back on, I guess, an incident everyone can relate to, which was the famous interview. I grew up in Nigeria, and I do remember this one library my grandma used to take me to called Quintessence. But today, my question is, in a world where wax is a trend, Afrobeats is an upcoming trend, how come I would say African or even Nigerian literary is not up with that? What is your vision for, or how do you see African literary taking the stage that it actually should take? What is your vision for the future? And how do you, not maybe how would you be a spokesperson, but more how do you position yourself in that path?
I actually think that African literature is I'm very uncomfortable with the word trend, but I think it's doing fairly well outside of Africa. I actually think that young people today from the continent who are writing have a much higher possibility of being published and being read seriously today than 20 years ago, much higher. I actually think there's a kind of upswing. But, I mean, back to, by the way, that question, I mean, she's referring to an interview I did in Paris in which a woman asked me whether there were bookshops. It was actually bookshops, not libraries. And she said that she'd asked that question because a majority of French people did not know. And so increasingly what I'm interested in talking about is that, I mean, if that is in fact a fact, that the idea of bookshops in Nigeria would be news to a majority of French people, that's very disturbing on many levels. But yeah, I mean, I'm not really worried for African literature. I think I'm quite optimistic. Yeah.
Thank you. My question is about toxic masculinity. So I grew up, well, I've been reading all your books and I love you, so that's why I'm shaking. But I developed feminism from reading your books and my ideas about what my womanhood is. But growing up in Ghana, that was constantly challenged by women in my life, by the men in my life, and by society in general. And so reading the book, Dear Idées, I'm thinking about how I can raise my daughter. I don't have one yet, but we'll see. But also, how do we raise our sons to be different? And not necessarily to be different, but to become the new norm that is feminist in its being, even if we don't call it feminism. I think that there's something maybe you can say about that for me, a young woman who doesn't really have an African feminist role model to look at. That would be very helpful for me. Thank you.
That's the next thing I'm going to do. How to raise a boy. So for our sister here with her 2 sons, I mean, I was thinking about that because it's a huge responsibility. But it's also a necessity that boys have to be raised differently. And I've often said that for me, feminism is not just about women, because we can change all the women in the world, and if the men remain unchanged, then nothing has changed because we have to share the planet. So it's either we change them or we round up all the men and drown them. No, that's a joke. So. Joke, please. Nobody write my agent emails, please. Joke. So, but I think, I think one of the ways is to remake masculinity. Let's make it a different thing. We raise boys now to value things that are just really, I think, bad for them. I think masculinity is terrible for men. That idea that you always have to be strong, that idea that you don't have the language for your emotions. There's a sense in which a lot of masculinity is a certain kind of hollow performance. And I'm thinking in raising boys, for example, what if we emphasize different things? So that whole idea of saying, boys don't cry, be tough. What if we never said that? What if we expected them from the time that they're 8 months old to cry? And actually, what if we shame them for not crying? No, seriously. Because, and it will take a critical mass of people, but you can sometimes see the men who are raised by parents who think differently. You can see that they're kind of different, And so things like that, that idea of a man always being a protector, I think that we need to change that. Because I think what it does is that there's a kind of internalizing that comes with masculinity. And it worries me because I think you internalize so much and then violence almost becomes inevitable. I would, for example, I don't have a son, obviously. If I did, I don't think there would be much of a difference in how I raise my son and my daughter. And I mean to say that growing up, I saw how when boys did domestic work, they were praised excessively. When girls did domestic work, it was just seen as, yeah, they're girls. And I see it even now with adults. I would not do that. Because I think we need to make it ordinary for boys to think that domestic work is absolutely ordinary and anybody can learn it. I say this all the time. Girls are not born with the ability to do domestic work. They learn it. Anybody can learn it. And the reason I keep harping on domestic work, apart from the fact that I don't like doing domestic work, is because I think it's really intertwined with many things. When we talk about can a woman have it all, it's based on that premise that a woman does the domestic work or the sort of the caregiving. So cleaning, childcare, parent care, the assumption is the woman does it. And so when we start talking about whether she can do it all, what we're saying is when she's done cooking, cleaning, taking care of the child, taking care of the aging parents, can she then have a career? But what if we change that premise? And what if, in fact, caregiving is something that men and women do? Honestly, that conversation of can a woman have it all would change. It would change because then a woman wouldn't have to battle dealing with the ridiculous pressure of she's doing all the caregiving, she's doing all the housework. She's the one who knows where the children's socks are. She's the one who schedules all the children's. She does every damn thing, and then she does her job. And, yeah.
Go ahead.
Thanks, I have the microphone now.
We have to have a battle. All right, no. You go first and then you.
Thanks so much.
There is enough room to share.
Thank you. I'm super excited to get to ask this question because I promised my friend I would ask this question. We read your book together. We're all Jamaican. And so I'm super excited about the Haitian that was up there. It was so cool, Vive Haiti.
It was beyond cool. It was so powerful. It was so
Supremely.
Powerful.
I'm super happy about it because I learned a lot about Pan-Africanism and appreciating African in you as a Caribbean person, as someone who's kind of separated from the continent, from the Haitian brothers and sisters that came to Jamaica after the earthquake in 2010. So I really appreciated seeing that. Also, your book, Half of a Yellow Sun, was the first Black, probably, and African woman novel that I ever read. And so me and my two friends were super excited about it, and we were lost in it. And we had one, and Kainene, for me, was this symbol of feminism that I was kind of aspired to be, kind of impossible for me to even dream of at that age. I was 19, 20 or something like that. Today I feel super I think she'd be proud of me. But I wonder how you conceptualize this character and I was so hard at the end that she kind of disappeared. So I told my friends I would ask about if you could provide any feedback, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. I wish I could provide feedback. Sadly, I cannot because I don't know what happened to her. Honestly, I don't know. But I wanted to, in researching the novel, I came across a number of stories like that. And I think it's the most heartbreaking thing because when you know, you can mourn. But when you don't know, you always have that sliver of hope in your heart. And I think it's just the most heartbreaking thing. And I read stories about people. I talked to one woman whose son had never come back. She'd never heard of his death. And until recently, I mean, the war ended in 1970. But in 2012, she was still going off to towns where somebody had said, we saw somebody who looks like him, and she would go off to look. And there's something about it that just broke my heart. And so I wanted to try and capture that sense of just not knowing. Yes.
My name is... I have the mic.
No, she has a mic too.
At the back first, please.
Yeah.
Finally. Hi, my name is Caroline. I'm from Rwanda. And I don't think I can thank you enough for gracing us with your presence today. I've read most of your books, and you've inspired me in many ways. And my question for you today is, how do we invite or make African men understand the benefits of feminism and how it can benefit us, the family, and our countries and continent collectively?
Oof. That means two things. So I'm Igbo, and Igbo people are known to think very highly of money. So one of the things I do with my Igbo brothers to try and get them to, I say to them, aren't you tired of always paying for everything? So that's usually an opening thing where I say, well, you shouldn't. And they say, yeah, I really shouldn't. And then I say, but if you shouldn't pay for everything, then there are other things you have to accept, which is, and then suddenly they're like, but I really increasingly think that we need to sell that. Feminism has to be, because again, if we're thinking not in terms of the theory of it, but the practicality of it, it's really to try and find ways to make it seem not so bad for men. Because part of the reflexive resistance to feminism on the part of men is that they think they're losing. Right? And yes, equality will involve a certain loss of privilege, but not necessarily a loss. I really think that if we lived in a feminist world, men would be better off. And I think in some ways it's to sell it to them in sort of, you don't have to be burdened by all of these expectations of masculinity. You don't have to, you can in fact, because I think deep inside many men, they really would like to just be human and to cry. And we need to teach women that it's okay for men to cry. Because that's another thing, I think, that holds men back, because they think, I can't lose face. And, to encourage it, to say, to reward it even. There's a part of me that kind of is irritated at having to kind of treat men like children, But you do what you have to do. and Sylvain just spilled his water at that point.
Non, c'est juste que on me fait des grands signes et je crois que pour des raisons logistiques liées à la suite des événements ici, il faut vraiment qu'on s'arrête. Donc, je suis désolé de devoir l'annoncer. Je vous remercie toutes et tous pour votre attention et je remercie.
Thank you, Sylvain. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.